So it's finally happening. The government is turning this country into a totalitarian nightmare. With China-like censorship, the 1984's Orwellian nightmare is finally here, and the Big Brother is watching you, watching us all. The final nail in the coffin of freedom of speech in this country is here in the form of the Broadcasting Services Regulation Bill. Even on the internet, you're not going to be free to say what you want. You won't be able to hear or read the opposing view or the view that is not sanctioned by the government. More bureaucratic oversight, more government control, no more freedom to express your opinion or criticize the government and its policies. No more independent news or analysis. And with this bill, it's the return of the license Raj and more dependence on the government and its inefficient, corrupt, and disgusting bureaucrats. With this new broadcasting regulation bill, the government is replacing the old Cable Television Networks Act of 1995. However, this new bill doesn't just target traditional media, but also covers all OTT platforms. Everyone from the broadcasting networks like cable channels to OTT platforms like Netflix must register with the government, which is understandable because with changing times you have to change the legislature and the laws. But more alarmingly, social media and YouTube content are now considered a part of OTT platforms. So if you have a substantial following, you must register your YouTube channel or your social media profile with the government. This includes news and current affairs programs and content, especially those covering recent socio-political, economic, and cultural events. While I couldn't care less about the traditional media and OTT platforms, it's the individual social media creators who will have to navigate the nightmare of Indian bureaucracy that concerns me the most. This bill's regulations creates layers after layers of bureaucracy and red tape for creators, forcing them to navigate through the mess and chaos of Indian bureaucracy just to publish their work. Not only does the bill impose content codes addressing hate speech, violence, and misinformation, but it also gives power to the government and its bureaucrats to enforce harsher penalties for non-compliance, from fines to warnings and even jail time. For example, failing to register your content for censorship alone can result in a fine up to 50 lakhs or imprisonment up to 5 years or both. So what they are planning with this bill is that every online creator with a substantial following will have to register with the same 3-tier regulatory system used for TV and streaming services. Creators will need to inform the government about their content, and if it goes against the government's agenda, they might block them from publishing it or even put them in jail if they don't register or follow their ever-changing guidelines. And see, the TV channels and OTT platforms like Netflix Prime, these are huge corporations. They have means to fight against the censorship, fight against the laws, fight against the changing guidelines. But what about the individual creators? They don't have means to do that. Who has the resources to fight a case or go to court where they won't get justice anyways? And if by some miracle they win, it would be decades later when it's basically pointless. Let's face it, we all know how justice system in India works. Now, it's not just that. They also have to create a content evaluation committee at their own expense. Soviet Union style. I mean, these authoritative collectivist jackasses just love their committees and councils, don't they? Anyways, this committee will review all your content before you can post it online on any social media, forcing you to self-censor. And if that's not enough, social media companies are legally required to provide user information or face criminal charges. Even without this law, the Indian government has already been banning videos, documentaries, and removing posts critical of them. It's like they're taking a page straight from China's playbook. The funny thing is, a person has to pay to construct this committee and maintain it and pay the salary of grievance officers whom they are forced to hire. Basically, they are paying for their own oppression and censorship. It's bizarre, but if you think about it, it's exactly how the government itself functions. We pay taxes so that these useless bureaucrats and politicians can get their salaries and have money to come up with stupid laws and plans to oppress us every single second and make our life a living hell. They think that passing a stupid exam or getting elected by fooling a bunch of uninformed people somehow gives them the authority to rule over us as if they are modern-day kings and queens. Once they are elected or get the job, they forget that they are public servants and not our overlords. Anyways, the second tier involves self-regulatory organizations or SROs. These organizations will handle complaints and issues with the content, providing guidelines and advice to ensure compliance with the central government's instructions. The third and the final tier is the Broadcast Advisory Council, the government's censorship agent. This council will hear complaints against SROs or those referred to it by the central government itself. The central government will only take actions based on the recommendation of this council, which of course is made up of technocratic, managerial and bureaucratic elites, whose only job is to please the government and save their own asses, protect their own positions, power and their jobs. Now, what if you are a freedom-loving individual who believes in the freedom of speech and understands that it's not a government-given right, but an inalienable right, a human right. And if you want to exercise your right to freedom of speech, right to privacy, and the right to be anonymous on the internet, well then you have to turn into a criminal. Because if you fail to register, if you fail to comply, you will be treated like one and you will be heavily fined, sent to jail or both. Similarly, the other offenses come under the same category, that either you conform to the government or go to jail. So if you don't follow the government's narrative and propaganda, you'll be fined and put in jail. Also, platforms like YouTube, Instagram, X, and Spotify will also have to change their policies and practices to meet these new government regulations. This will affect how content is promoted by algorithms, limiting the reach of creators who are already struggling with these platforms' algorithms, censorship, and ad policies. See, I don't understand it. If the government really wanted to do something positive for the economy, for people and for content creators, they should tackle the censorship practices of these platforms and their biased rules and guidelines, instead of adding another layer of regulations and censorship. According to this proposed bill, the government will have the power to decide whether a piece of content breaks their programming code or qualifies as hate speech or misinformation, terms that government can define however they want, whenever they want. This will especially target content and news that criticizes the government, creating a clear conflict of interest. On top of that, the bill imposes data localization requirements, meaning that platforms have to store data within India. This makes it easier for the government to access the data, raising big privacy concerns and creating operational challenges across the country. This kind of over-regulation, government overreach and censorship threatens the creative freedom, complicates monetization and impacts every creator, not just creatively, but financially, since many of them rely on these platforms for their income. It's like getting cancelled by the government itself. Honestly, this bill is just a modern version of burning books, banning newspapers, and jailing free thinkers and freedom fighters who dare to stand up against government tyranny. I mean, what's the difference between what the current Indian government is doing and the colonial government of our past? This new broadcasting regulation bill is simply a way to regulate speech and dissent. Now, it's one thing to try to give certification for different types of programs and movies on TV, in cinemas, or on OTT platforms like Netflix, Prime, Hotstar, whatever. But we already have ministries and constitutional bodies filled with useless bureaucrats and political elites for this job, to give certification and to censor them. But it's another thing entirely when you try to censor the internet itself and the individual creators on YouTube, X, Instagram, Spotify, or other non-traditional platforms. If you take a closer look at the proposed bill, you'll find a pretty scary agenda. The vague rules in the bill creates grey areas that can be used to control content creators who cover a wide range of topics, including government plans and politics. The bill's real intention is clear in Section 30, which gives the government or its authorized agencies sweeping powers to inspect broadcasting networks and services, with or without prior notice. Now, by treating content creators the same as OTT and traditional media, this invasive authority risks disrupting and undermining their work, putting them under constant surveillance and scrutiny. The next Section 31 is even more extreme, giving the government the power to seize and confiscate broadcasting equipment at will. This endangers individual creators' livelihoods and creates a climate of fear and self-censorship. Suppose a content creator is making content against or for the ideology of feminism, casteism, sexism, criticizing environmentalists or corporations for destroying the environment, or is critical of a particular religion. Would the Content Evaluation Committee allow that? Or let's say a person is criticizing the reservation system, or the recent Farm Bill, or other policies of the government. Do you think the Content Evaluation Committee, SROs or BAC would allow that? And if somehow it did, and some asshole decided to complain about the content creator would end up in jail for violating the law. So, a person has to work, think and speak according to the government, just like in China, Nazi Germany and Soviet Union, or risk going to the jail. The true intention of this bill is clear. The government wants to control not just our private lives anymore, but now the huge digital content space and silence dissenting voices. By specifically targeting influential creators, the bill will stop innovation and suppress free expression. This is a direct attack on the creative freedom that is the foundation of our digital age. It's crucial that we resist these authoritarian measures and protect the rights of content creators and the diversity of voices that enrich our society and our economy. Even if you're not a content creator, it's important to understand how harmful this bill is for our economy alone. Don't let the government turn this free and fair creative environment into a conformist nightmare. I understand bureaucrats don't possess the intellect or the critical thinking. But come on, is there no political leader who can see the disastrous consequences of this bill? We already have laws in place for television broadcasting and movie certification. And for the internet, we already have a very controversial EU-style IT rules, which are already harming the free speech environment on the internet. So why do we need this bill in the first place? And I don't buy the whole thing about safeguarding quote-unquote public interests and preventing the transmission of content that is against national interest. That's a code word for blatant censorship. Interest of Indian people, interest of citizens of this country should be the national interest for the government, not the interest of its own. And what is good for Indian people? What is in their interest? Censorship or free speech? How could it possibly be in the public interest to lock up dissenting voices? I can see a justification for censoring streaming platforms that are basically distributing porn at this point. I see the point that this type of content should not be viewed by children. But there is no need to include the whole internet and social media in this. If the government wants to censor entertainment on its streaming platforms, okay, it's somewhat understandable. Well, not exactly. But for the sake of the argument, let's presume there is a need for it. I get that they want to censor entertainment and programming on streaming platforms, though it's nearly impossible, just like porn. But it's understandable that the government tries to show that they're doing something about it, even though it's not really their job. In my personal opinion, people should be allowed to watch or do whatever they want as long as they are not hurting someone. And everything is age restricted anyways. And let's be honest with ourselves here, if kids want to access content made for adults, there's not a single fucking thing that their parents or government can do about it. And if government still wants to try and control the shows on TV and OTT platforms, go right ahead. That's not my concern. The issue here is not entertainment. Who the fuck cares about the entertainment, the TV shows, the movies and stuff like that? It doesn't matter what you do with TV or OTT platforms. The major issue is that this bill has been designed to suppress citizen journalism, individual journalism. This bill is designed to protect traditional media, their favorite media houses, news channels and newspapers, all of which have already been bought by the government and its politicians. They don't give the public the truth or fair news. As a matter of fact, they never did. They follow a set narrative given by the government or their own ideologies. But now, with the help of the internet, people can find the truth, do their own research, voice their opinions, and educate others who have been misled by the legacy media for decades. The government and the legacy media will never let you know the truth if it doesn't fit their narrative. And with this bill in place, you won't hear alternative views, just like in China. So the threat is individual journalism, citizen journalism, the people who are trying to bring about change in this country, the people who have finally got their voices in this goddamn country after 78 years because of internet. The people finally have a voice and the government is threatened by it. They are scared of you and that's why they are coming after you and your rights with this stupid bill. And also that's a pretty good way to eliminate competition, isn't it? So don't expect the legacy media and the entertainment industry to come to your rescue either. As a matter of fact, it's for their benefit that this bill is being introduced. Of course, the internet and platforms like YouTube are a threat to these people. Like, who the fuck watches TV anymore? Only old people and old ladies. That's about it. Who is going to cinemas? Granted, in India, it's still a big industry, but not for long. And no one is reading one-sided stupid newspapers and watching news on TV anymore. We are getting our news from YouTube, from individual journalists, and X, which is far more reliable than legacy media. Even if we forget about the dangers of this bill to freedom of speech and liberty itself, which is like, who the fuck is free in this country anyways? No one is. We were born in slavery and we are probably destined to die in slavery. We never had any freedom. The right to freedom of speech, the right to property, the freedom to carry arms to protect ourselves, nothing. We don't have any of that. If we put aside this stupid idea of ours, and what a stupid idea it is, right? Individuality, freedom, what a joke, right? We should count ourselves lucky that we are breathing in this totalitarian conformist utopia, this great nation of communist and fascist mixture. But let's talk about what the government actually cares about. Our money, our taxes. So why are they so hell-bent on destroying another market by their intervention? Don't they ever learn from their past mistakes that when you interfere with a free market, you create a monopoly? Or are they counting on it? Do they not see the problems we have in India? All thanks to the bureaucratization of every institution. Now see, when you push this bureaucratic structure into the free market, what does it do? It creates monopolies, it creates favoritism, it creates nepotism, it gives way to the corruption. And that's been happening in this country across so many industries for years now. Why do you think we have very little manufacturing left in this country and the whole economy is dependent on the service industry alone? It's not just nationalization, although that pretty much destroyed the Indian economy, but the government interference in the market, red tape, and license Raj have been major hurdles in our economy for almost a century now. This is why this country never had any major manufacturing industries. It's not because of colonization, it's government interference in the free market. Most talented people just choose to leave this country if they want opportunities, if they want to be entrepreneurs and want a better future for themselves and their kids. And most of the multinational companies don't want to start a business here or establish a manufacturing plant here because of the corrupt bureaucracy and the government intervention. So, just like manufacturing, now they are trying to destroy another free market industry where there is no barrier to entry or exit. Anybody can come, anybody can join and compete against each other, create content, and if you are good enough, you will succeed. Look at how big of an economy has been created by the internet and the content creators. How much money and jobs are dependent on it. The government has nothing to do with it. They did not create some plan, some stupid 5-year plan or something like that. There is no subsidy or reservation in this. They did it on their own. That's how the free market works. Self-employed, not dependent on the government for anything, and even paying a lot of taxes, thus actually contributing to the economy, unlike the blood-sucking parasites of bureaucracy and politics. And now, by introducing this bill, the government is robbing not just us, not just the people living right now, but future generations as well. They are robbing those kids of opportunities, their dreams, and a fair chance to compete with the world across the globe. How many kids are dreaming of being YouTubers? How many kids are dreaming of having a career in social media and all these sites? What do you think is going to happen to the economy when you have this bill? How many people are going to lose their jobs? How many people who have a substantial following are going to be censored? What's going to happen to them? Look at all the great talent that has come out of India because of internet and social media. All the influencers, artists, social media commentators, and YouTubers. The culture itself is gaining recognition all over the world. The music, the new artists, filmmakers, socio-economic and political commentators and critics, citizen journalists, and other content creators who could never achieve any kind of success or recognition in the old legacy media, television and film industry because of the monopoly and nepotism. Even to publish a book, you have to have connections or be rich or famous enough to get a literary agent to put your book for publication. And now, because of internet, look at the kids from all backgrounds, regardless of social status, religions, castes, and regions across the country, making content, music, videos, and doing all sorts of new exciting creative things. Look at that kid Hanuman guy from Kerala. He's blowing up everywhere in the world right now because of YouTube and the internet. Would any of that be possible without the freedom that internet provides? Could any of these guys show their creativity and talent through traditional media or be given a chance to showcase their talent? Of course not. The internet allowed everyone an equal chance without any help from the government or money or connections. And now, because government feels threatened by some YouTubers and bloggers, they want to destroy that equality of opportunity. How is that fair? How is that a democracy? How is that no censorship and slavery? Should we all just be part of the managerial society, joining the bureaucracy and these disgusting IS, IPS type services and oppressing our own people? Is that the only choice we have for a good life in this country? Or is getting out of India the only other option? Are we not allowed to say and do things that would change this country? Isn't that what the older people have been saying to the younger generation? That we should take charge and change things, provide new perspective and offer solution to the existing problems of this country? So when younger generation is finally doing it, the government wants to censor us? Are we not allowed to speak our mind without being thrown in jail for it? Are only the elites of this society allowed to have a say, while the rest of us should just shut up and accept our quiet servitude? Imagine if America came up with such a law. Do you think big YouTubers like Mr. Beast, streamers like Kai Cenat and other influencers would even exist? Do you think there would be a way for them to get into traditional media? Do you think traditional media would ever allow podcasts and 3-hour-long lengthy conversations? Do you think someone would give Joe Rogan a 3-hour program on television every day where he can talk to anyone he wants and say whatever he wants without the fear of censorship? Of course not. And what about the independent journalists and critics of the government who finally got a platform because of the internet and social media? For example, all these political pundits in India, USA, England, anywhere who have these podcasts, YouTube channels, post on Twitter and criticize the government, all the whistleblowers and people who expose the government's nefarious plans and hidden agendas and inform the public about the issues facing the economy and society. They all became giant names, trustable names, because of internet. Would they even exist with such a law in place? Let's take a recent example from America. Tucker Carlson wouldn't be able to get a job in traditional media after he was fired from Fox News. But because of Twitter and YouTube, he got his career back and he was finally free to say what he actually wanted to say. You don't have to like him or agree with him. Neither does the current American government, but he has the right to say whatever he wants. And the traditional media, the TV channels, the news channels would not allow that. That's why they fired him. Imagine if America or Canada came up with such a policy. Do you think people like Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, or Jordan Peterson would even exist? Of course not. We don't see a lot of Joe Rogans and Petersons coming out of China or Russia now, do we? That could never happen. And maybe this is precisely why they are coming up with this bill in India, so that such a person would not even come to prominence in this country. They don't want these type of people to emerge and show people the truth, or at least give people an alternative narrative. And by this bill, they would control not just Indians living in India, but any Indian citizen who have the means to go out and live in another country and they still have the dream to change India and the lives of our people. If they choose to criticize the government, politics, politicians, or the socio-economic conditions of Indians, they would be subjected to this law. And you know what's going to happen to them? They are going to be banned, they are going to be censored, and if they come home, they are going to be treated like animals for telling the truth. I hate it when somebody uses terms like misinformation, hate speech and all that. The only solution we have as a society is to have other people who are there to correct it, and they can only do it through speech. And you can't label speech as hate speech or misinformation. I mean, who decides that? The limited free speech we have, which is in my opinion is no free speech at all, even without this proposed bill, people are being thrown in jail just because someone gets offended when a person says something against their favorite politician, celebrity or group, which is such a moronic thing that only happens in this incredible India. We already have laws against defamation. We already have laws against showing corn, violence, and we already have copyright laws that applies to everything, no matter what the medium is. So what's the need for this particular law if it's not just for the specific purpose of censorship and suppressing dissent and criticism of the government? How much more control do these bastards want? Instead of creating laws to protect online creators, journalists and critics so that they would not be cancelled or threatened or killed by some radical moron, the government proposes a bill that destroys their creativity and hard work. This bill creates barrier to entry and imposes censorship. Instead of supporting and safeguarding their content and copyrights, you come up with a legislation that suffocates their freedom. Why don't you address the fundamental issues first? This country has one of the worst track records of human rights violations. Unemployment, security, lack of justice, healthcare, hunger, poverty, discrimination, and even clean drinking water, compounded by bureaucratic inefficiency and corruption. Anyone living in India knows how corrupt and inefficient bureaucracy, judiciary, legislature, executive, police, medical, and all the other institutions are. Instead of creating new layers of bureaucracy and giving more power to these corrupt entities, why not focus on eliminating the existing problems and getting rid of some of these useless institutions and ministries? The priority should be to address corruption and ensure that the current institutions are functioning properly. We need fewer, not more bureaucratic positions. Just by getting rid of UPSC and the Office of District Collector alone could push the progress of this country to the next level. You talk about achieving $5 trillion economy, but just by eliminating these redundant institutions could propel us to $20 trillion economy within the next decade. But instead, you propose a new bill that grants more power to these corrupt officials. What's wrong with you? Why would you come up with such a law? Unless this bill has been proposed and drafted by some useless bureaucrats, some IAS officers, then I understand. And it probably has. The way our Indian government functions, it's probably true. Because this bill is going to affect politicians as well, regardless of their party, BJP or Congress. Doesn't matter if they are liberals, conservatives, socialists or communists. So why would they come up with this proposed bill? It's obviously by some bureaucratic asshole. Because in future, any political party, any political leader who wants to say something, who wants to run a campaign on YouTube or wants to post something, who of course going to have a substantial following, he has to register with the government, and then the party in power, it could be Congress, it could be BJP, would they allow the opposing party to say anything against them? Of course not. So it's for their own benefit that these politicians also oppose this bill if they don't want to be persecuted by other parties. Seriously, don't let these bureaucrats control the country. These unelected bastards are destroying this country. And there is another point that I want to talk about. In a democratic nation, the idea of creating new laws or getting rid of useless ones is the function of the parliament and our legislature. However, there has to be a need for that. And that need has to be to safeguard people's rights, their civil and human rights, and their security. And any law that encroaches upon people's freedom and their civil rights should not even be considered, let alone drafted, discussed behind closed doors, and put in front of the House for approval. And this draft broadcasting bill does exactly that. First, you have to censor yourself, and then the social media companies censors you, and then the government and their broadcasting agency censors you. Imagine that. Where is the freedom of speech? Where is the freedom to criticize the government and the right to dissent? Where is the right to privacy and the right to anonymity? Where is any kind of freedom that this bill provides you or protects you from any violation of your rights? Instead of coming up with stupid laws and regulations to curb people's freedom and liberty, get rid of the useless laws and regulations that hinders the functioning of the free market and the economy. Let people start a business. Make it easier for them to start a business. Make it easier for foreign companies to come and do business in India without the interference of the government and its useless IAS, IPS officers and other bureaucratic assholes. So that you could have more foreign reserves and people can get more opportunities and jobs. Fix the damn economy that you people been screwing up for the past 78 years. Listen, first of all, I'm not going to talk to you about protecting your right to freedom of speech. Because in this country, you have no right to freedom of speech since 1951. The First Amendment in the Constitution alone took every single right that was necessary for a free society. So what are you going to protect? You never had freedom of speech. Forget about that. Even if you can save your right to freedom of speech or your other rights, your God-given rights, your human rights, how are you going to protect those rights? We can't even protect our families and ourselves against murderers, robbers, and criminals of all sorts. So how do we expect to fight a tyrannical government who has its own police and army and has sole monopoly on violence and guns? Even our right to have guns and our right to protect ourselves were also taken away from us by our British colonial masters. And our freedom fighters who formed a new government, a new so-called democracy, a so-called republic, never thought of reinstating that right back to us. There was no Independence Day in this country. It was just an exchange of one master for another. First it was the white master and now it's brown, and the government stayed the same. I mean, if you think about it, what kind of country is this? What kind of CCP-like government do we have here? What kind of dumb, anti-freedom, anti-liberty assholes have we elected to the legislature? And what kind of disgusting pieces of shit bureaucrats have came up with this brilliant idea? In this country, people already lack basic freedoms, both economic and personal. Yet now, when by some miracle we have access to the internet, now they are planning to take away even the little bit of economic prosperity and the access to information we have. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. This isn't about left-wing or right-wing politics. It's about individual freedom. Don't let these people take that away from you. See, the idea of democracy is that the government is not your friend and the government is not the country. Our country is beautiful, with abundant natural resources and opportunities and very talented people. But mismanagement since independence has been destroying it. Lack of freedom and trust in our own citizens is what ruined us. The government is a necessary evil, never forget that. And if it encroaches upon your life and liberty, fighting against it is your duty, and not just as an Indian, but as a human being. They claim that this broadcasting bill is for national interest. But what is this national interest? This vague term that anti-freedom authoritarian governments like to throw around, how is banning speech and censoring people is in national interest? It may be in the interest of the government, but it certainly is not for the national interest. That's just an excuse. It's not about the national interest. It's about the government, politicians and bureaucrats trying to control and censor our lives. Don't be cowards like our ancestors who didn't protest and let the government change the constitution and make laws however they wanted. Don't give up on your freedom and your children's freedom so easily. Even if you can't win against the government, don't go down without a fight. Go out like a free human being, kicking and screaming. Let the world see that we as Indian people are not cowards and won't be pushed into slavery and conformity that easily. Remember that old saying, it's better to die on your feet than to live on your knees. And this bill should be a wake-up call for all of us about the urgent need to protect the creative freedom that drives our digital economy. It's crucial to make sure that the voices of individual creators are not silenced by the heavy-handed government control. Freedom of speech is crucial for any society that wants to maintain intellectual and social progress. Just look at the countries like India, China, Russia, Britain, France, and all the European and Latin American countries. Compare them to America, where there is still freedom. Where freedom is still surviving, even though the collectivist types and the lovers of the government and the establishment are working really hard to turn it into another failed civilization. We are living in such a bizarre time where people around the world are waking up to the lies and propaganda from the deep state, from the media, managerial elites, international organizations and governments. Everyone is fighting across the globe to reclaim or preserve their freedom. It's our time to join the fight. For now, what you can do is write to your MLA, your MP, your CM, PM, tweet to them on Twitter or X. Tell them, demand from them that they force the government to scrape the idea of the broadcasting bill, or at least don't include the internet, social media, content creators and individual creators. Just keep it limited to broadcasting channels and OTT platforms. Don't let them make another internet censorship law like IT rules. And protect the little bit of freedom of speech you still have, and a little bit of economic freedom you got because of the internet and social media.
And we do have dedicated police officers who are scouring social media. Their job is to look for this material and then follow up with identification arrests and so forth.
This is in relation to some comments that you made on a Facebook page.
You were witnesses saying, obviously, people, while they're over here, etc., we let them into our country, etc.
A woman has been arrested by Cheshire Police in relation to inaccurate information on social media.
Because someone has been caused, obviously, anxiety based upon your social media post. That's why you've been arrested.
In Russia last year, 400 people were arrested for things that they said on social media. How many people do you think were arrested in Britain for things they said on social media last year? Take a guess.
I have no idea.
3,300.
Really? Arrested for what they'd said on social media?
Yeah.
My goodness.
In Britain.